Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net. And today I'm here with Michael Jones, who's a friend of mine, and we're going to talk about yin and yang in relationships. All right, so just real quick, I wanted to talk about like how I met Michael. Basically he was my life coaching client, and like we've had a lot of good discussions and everything. And he was just in town, so we're doing a little collaboration video together. And he's also like a life coach, so if that's something that you think you'd be interested, like I'll leave his information down below in the description box. So do you want to go ahead and like explain how you found like my work and like kind of like what you wanted to talk about and all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't come from sort of like the spiritual side of things. I'm a I just graduated medical school, and I have a degree in chemistry. But I found a quote by Carl Jung that said, like, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. And so, I don't know, then I looked up a few other little things about that, and somewhere anima entrapment kind of came into the picture, and I was like, I think I might be doing that. And so I Googled it. I ended up finding her video out of like, I don't know, I watched quite a few of them, and I liked yours
Yeah,
the
thank
best.
you. Appreciate it.
And so then I just kept watching videos, and it was kind of an interesting thing because it was such a different genre than what I was familiar with, but yet it resonated with me. And I was like, okay, I mean, like people can call things different words, but like, I didn't realize I'd been lucid dreaming my whole life. I didn't know what that was. I thought everyone did that. But what helped me the most was just that since a guy is coming from like is in the journey of integrating his divine feminine, and the girl is in her journey of integrating the divine masculine, that they're different, and that like I could see another guy and see like how much I trust another guy because like, okay, well, how much does his experience and his journey trajectory like line up with mine? And that was rare, but at least easier to see in some people. But like the girl's journey just seemed to be so enigmatic, and it didn't. I couldn't comprehend because it's like, well, is someone gonna all of a sudden just like just go crazy or something?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so, meeting someone that I respect and look up to, and then like through like the life coaching, she shared a lot of personal stories, and it's like to like line up all these experiences and then the conclusions that came from it just like really helped me be able to trust women more. And it's not that I didn't really trust women. I mean, I have like my sisters are awesome, my mom's awesome, but like short of them, and I don't know, it just wasn't like as far as especially in a romantic sense,
Mhm.
trusting someone. And I don't think it was a coincidence that, you know, had a lot of bad experience. I'm 32 now, and then maybe 2 months after I meet like a girl I really like. So I think it was because I was able to visualize that journey better. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks. Yeah. No, and I just think that it's a really interesting topic in general because, like there is a lot of blind spots, like from both points of view, like just in terms of like, when it comes to like integrating that inner opposite aspect, it's like it really does work quite differently, even though, of course, there's like many different variations of like, like masculine and feminine intonations, and everybody has ultimately both of those things. Yeah. And what I find is that, what's interesting for me is that like I kind of started off on the foot of like being really, really heavily into like my masculine because I had a lot of like wounding around the feminine myself. And so basically 10 years ago when I was 20 years old, when I had like a lot of like crazy like things happen, like a lot of traumas, a lot of like transitions, and right around the time of my ego transcendent experiences, I realized, oh my gosh, like I'm really leaning into my masculine energy, which in some ways was like authentic to me because it was my masculine energy, but it was like I was overextending into that part of myself, and I wasn't really owning my most natural energy because I hadn't really had a lot of good examples of like what the empowered feminine would be like. And so really what my journey has been in the past like 10 years is really trying to get back in touch with that, feminine energy. And then, what's happened is sometimes it's been a little bit like if I try to get in touch with the feminine, I find that it's like I have a hard time being in touch with my masculine. And if I get in touch with the masculine, it's like that part of me tries to push away the feminine because that's the way I was used to orienting to it. And so, like for me, it's like always been like this back and forth. And it's like I think just in relation to what you had said, is like seeing somebody who's like actually on that journey, who is a woman. It's like it gives like a little bit of like an inversion, like it's almost like a negative like mirror
Mm.
almost in that sense, and you can kind of see like oh like almost like what's a good way to put it? It's kind of like how things are coming together for somebody who's going through the complementary thing to you, and it helps you get like a different perspective on what's going on. Yeah, and so yeah, it's definitely an interesting process for sure.
And
Yeah.
that complementary, I think, like helps you guess. So either one, you're like, oh, that I feel good about that, and then because it's complementary what I'm doing, but also it could inspire you, like, oh, there was this gap, and maybe it's the complementary to what they have. One thing I think was interesting was when we first met up yesterday. Um, I I asked her who she looked up to as a sense of like togetherness, like who was the best example of like just a good relationship. And it was just interesting how difficult it is to like actually think. I think the older I get, the less I look up to relationships, and it's like kind of sad because like you know what to look for better, and you see more problems,
Hmm. Yeah.
like the subtle passive aggressions, and you're like, dude, you guys have been married for like 20 years. Why are you still doing that? Like, just stop.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think like a lot of that comes down to like how, we don't learn a whole lot about like how we are as human beings. I think there tends to be number one sort of a taboo against emotions in general. Like I think the way a lot of people tend to look at emotions is like, oh, it's a sign of weakness or like, it's just a bother, they don't really have a function. And so that like informs that a whole lot, which is like the yin aspect, and the relationship ultimately is more predominantly yin than it is yang because it has to do with that emotional connection and that element. And so I think like a lot of people, number one, don't see the value in looking at emotions, because they've been taught that emotions aren't valuable. And then without that like baseline skill, it comes becomes very difficult to be able to relate to another person in a way where it's beyond just like projecting onto the other people because you wouldn't fundamentally have an understanding of what's going on internally. And it's kind of like because of that misunderstanding, a lot gets projected, and it's like this wedge comes in between you and the other person, where it's like essentially it's very difficult to have any sense of closeness or love or intimacy shared between the two partners. And what I've always found is I end up like hitting like this wall
Mm-hmm.
almost like when it comes to a relationship, and it's almost like you hit that wall and then you don't know how to get past it because you don't have that emotional intelligence there. But once you kind of learn that, you can find either ways to like dissolve that wall, if that's necessary, or find like a different path. And through that you can get more of an exploration and more of like a coming together with a partner, and that's what like creates that sense of intimacy.
Actually, just kind of made me realize like if we're projecting on someone, what are we projecting? Ourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's these two things that we want. Like our mind wants a sense of self, and our heart wants a sense of togetherness. Even though what we really should want is just to be a self and to be together.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting if you listed like the top 10 people you look up to, how many of them do you look up to them for their sense of togetherness? I think we look up like athletes, right? That.
Yeah, very individualistic kind of people. Yes, exactly. And I think that's like one of the things also that's like a societal thing is like we live in a place that really really admires like meritocracy and achievement and success. And I know that for me as a kid, growing up like education was like really really important, and there was always this idea of like, oh, you climb the ladder, you try to do the best, like, and
Mm-hmm.
there's like a competitive kind of thing, and so that comes into that need for self.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like if you're so used to being up here in the mind space and thinking almost like in this very like, you know, achievement oriented way, it's difficult to really tap into the heart space, which is really what you need to have like that kind of connection. And it's really what makes a relationship worth being in, is to have that connection with another person and to be able to grow together with that person as like a singular unit in a way. So it's almost like probably many of my viewers would probably relate to this idea of like being able to do self-exploration. And it's kind of like for me, like when I'm doing inner work and when I'm exploring myself, it's like I don't get tired of me. Like, you know, it's like I don't get tired of being in a relationship with me, because it's like I always know that there's more to find out, there's more to be discovered. But I found when I'm in a relationship with somebody else, it's almost like you hit that wall, and it's almost like that person becomes more of like a symbol, and it's hard to explore that person and really see past, you know, either what your barriers are in terms of like projection, or what the other person's like barriers are in terms of like their own like, you know, wounding and traumas and like all of the responses to that. And so what I found is that in a relationship, it's actually like conflict tends to be really important, like the way you would resolve it, because basically you have like, ideally you would be coming together like this, but you have all of these like jagged edges like kind of coming together, and it's like once those like pressure points hit, it creates conflict. And the degree to which you can kind of break down that conflict is how much you can actually use the relationship to kind of resolve those wounds, or you know, those barriers or whatever they happen to be. And there you can get like a more together, as opposed to all of these jagged edges like that kind of repel one another like porcupines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the key is like, what do we do when those jagged edges like hit each other? Like, it's like, ooh, that hurts. Like, ooh, that's like makes a weird noise. And it's like, no, like you just found out what you didn't know that you didn't know was in between you.
Yeah.
And you can now do something and now get closer. And now, you know, it's actually going to fit together instead of like not fit together.
Exactly. Yeah. So like relationships, I find are actually like, well, like if you orient to them the right way, you know, you can kind of like you can actually use them as a way to grow, like not just as a singular unit, but as individuals as well. And ideally, that's the type of relationship that you'd want to have, is where you both can grow in the relationship, and it's not like, you know, like your traumas are like coming in over like their ability to grow, or vice versa, or you know, whatever happens to be like their projection then like coming, you know. So a lot of times that's the situations that people like get themselves into. And again, it comes back down to like not being taught of how to deal with emotions, not being really necessarily taught about how to be in a relationship. You know, that kind of puts us in these like stalemate kind of situations where there's this feeling of like, oh, there's nowhere else to go, and like, you know, now it's just like everything becomes stagnant, you know.
Yeah, and we're actually taught the wrong way to come together. Like, oh, go be a doctor and then girls will love you. And it's like, well, okay, well, like, you know, love and sex or love and whatever attention are definitely different. And so we don't realize how many false assumptions we have about what brings us together and what we have to do to be a commodity, you know, fit this perfect mold. You know, we wonder why people have a problem with being a workaholic when they say, well, someone wants to see you working hard, they want money, and like that's going to impress them. And so we pursue that thing like just without feeling it, because there's nothing inside of us that genuinely wants to just be a workaholic. That's like obviously too much. It's like being a glutton versus like enjoying food.
Yeah.
But we do it because we think that that's what we have to do in order to connect, when like we're already all connected. Like we're intuitively all connected. We're a self, but we don't have to sell ourselves to connect. We just have to appreciate the connections that are already there.